Tech by Tips.
Hello and welcome to another Tech by Tips video. First of all, I want to thank Christopher Brooks for a donation to the channel. Thank you very much. Your donations help me keep going and focusing on this channel, so they're highly appreciated, and I want to shout out whenever you are contributing to the channel. Thank you very much. Next thing is, the topic of this video is going to be a video that I've had in the queue for a long time, but honestly I feel bad for not doing it. It's a request that came from a donor to the channel, NetGarnet4337, and it is about the application named Immich. If you are familiar with the channel, you know that I created a open source good or bust on this, and at the time I decided that I was not gonna do a setup video because, you know, it's still kind of in its infancy. Some things are, you know, still shady with the application and stuff, but, you know, I gave it some time. I gave it about a year to see if things improved a little better. I honestly don't see that the progress is super fast, so I just don't want to leave NetGarnet just hanging there after he contributed to the channel. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a setup video on the application as it is right now. Hopefully in the future the application will get even better, and then it's gonna be worth it for everyone. So let's get to that. So I am in the GitHub repository. I've already kind of covered this on a previous video in the channel. So if you go and search for Immich in the channel, you'll see this on the open source good or bust on Immich. So I covered a lot of stuff there, so I'm not going to really go into details, but I want to just make a reference to the Immich app documentation here. So if you click there, it takes you to their official website here where you can see information about it. And on this website, you will be able to also find the documentation on how to set it up, right? So if we come down here, they also have a link here that immediately takes us there. So where it says installation, you can click there, and that'll immediately take you here into the installation section. Then we're gonna go into the Docker Compose section, which is what we care about to install this application in our Synology NAS using Container Manager, which is basically a rebrand of Docker. Alright, so we have a reference here to a Docker Compose on an environment variable, but I want to make a very important note, a warning here. The reason why this video has taken me so long to release is because I tried to follow their documentation for many times. I tried to deploy this application like over 10 times following their documentation, and something is wrong with it. So I'm giving you where it is here, so that you can read up on it if you want, but do not follow their Docker Compose and example environment file. I'm going to do it my own way, the only way that I made it work, and I'm going to show you how to get it working in a Synology NAS my way. Now, this is relying on an environment file. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put everything in a Docker Compose file, so just know that. Another thing is that if you want to be very granular about how you want your application to run, you can go into the environment variables option here, where they give you a lot of information about a bunch of different variables. I'm going to minimize this as much as possible. I'm going to use very little environment variables, enough just to get it working for you. But if you want to learn, here you go. Another thing is, there's a configuration file here under the environment variables down here. You have two options to configure the application. You can use this sample configuration file, image.json, or you can use the user interface to configure the application. So I'm gonna cover that in the section where I talk about the Docker Compose file, right? So I wanted to let you know how you can find all this stuff here, so you can read up on it if you want to get later into more detail and try to tweak it. But I'm going to make it very simple for you to actually get it working in your NAS. So now let's get to work. We go into our NAS as usual. We're going to go into our folders, and we're going to create a project for it. So I've already created a project here, Immich, but it doesn't have anything. And where I put all the container stuff, I have my Immich folder, and in there we have the config folder, the database folder, and the uploads folder. The config folder is where you would put this configuration file if you want to go that route. So basically, you come here, you copy all of this, and then you create an image.json file in here, and then you put the contents of that in there. And then the application will load with those defaults, and then you can just tweak it later and save those changes. So that's what we use the config folder for. Now the DB folder is where we're going to store our Postgres database. So we're going to use a container to hold the database, and it's going to store all its information here. And now the uploads is where you would put files that then the Immich application is going to consume and organize. So you'll see that it'll create a bunch of folders and stuff here. So that's the folder structure. Now that we have that, we can go into the projects here, and then we can create a new project, and I'm going to name this Immich, and I'm going to select that path in the projects that I just created, and then I'm going to say I'm going to create a Docker Compose file, and I already have the Docker Compose file here, so I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to say don't start the project and save so that we can see it in a better screen, and then we're going to discuss the Docker Compose file. Now we go into here into the project, we go into YAML configurations, and here's the Docker Compose file. So we're using version 3 and we're declaring services. We're going to need 4 containers. So the first container is the application server, so that's the Immich server. The second one is the machine learning server. And the third one is the cache server for the database, so that's a Redis. And then the database service. So that's all the 4 things that we need to create. So now, on the first one, which is the actual Immich server, I'm going to name the container Immich-server, and I'm going to use their official image, but the release tag, which means release means production. So I'm going to use the production one. Now, if you have any graphics card in your NAS or the computer that you're running this and you want to make it accessible, you can look at the documentation on how to set this up. I'm not going to do that, so I'm just going to leave it commented out, but this is where you would put all that information. So extends, and you have to have a YAML configuration for the hardware, acceleration for transcoding, and then you have to specify here. In this case, it says CPU, so it's not going to use a graphics card. So let's say, for example, you have an NVIDIA graphics card, then you have to change this for NVEnc. If you have an Intel graphics card, then you would use QuickSync. If you have like a AMD graphics card, you use VAAPI, and like that. So you have to check that, what you have to put here in the case that you're going to use it. In my case, I just leave it commented out because I'm not going to use it. Now here for the server, we're going to mount, remember the NAS is on the left and the containers on the right. So I'm going to mount the uploads folder that we created in the NAS into the user source app upload in the container. And in the case that you want to use the config file that they provide you here, remember then you have to mount the config directory in the NAS into the /config in the container. I have it commented out because I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the user interface. Now, the environment variables, as usual, we put the time zone, in my case America, New York, and I put my user and my group for the first administrator of the NAS. And then in here, you have to uncomment this line here if you're going to use that configuration file that I just mentioned here. Because in here, we're mounting the folder in the NAS so that we can see the contents of that folder in the container. But in here, we have to let the server know you have to go into this config folder and you have to read this image.json file as your configuration file. So if you're going to use the configuration file, uncomment this line. Now, the application listens on port 2283, and I'm exposing it on 2283 also on the NAS. You can expose it anywhere you want as long as it doesn't conflict with anything else that you have. And now I'm saying that this container depends on the database and the cache working properly, and I want to restart it unless I manually stop it. So that's all for the first container, the application server. Now, we go to the machine learning server. It's the Immich machine learning service. We're going to name it Immich-machine-learning, capitalized. And again, if you're going to be using a graphics card here, then on the image here that you're going to be using, you have to specify release and then dash whatever graphics card you're using. So, I mean, for hardware acceleration. So if you're using CUDA, you use release dash CUDA. If you use OpenVINO, you use release dash OpenVINO. If you use RMNN, you use release dash RMNN. You see, like an example, it shows here. I'm not going to use it, so it's commented out. And here is where you specify the graphics, the accelerated inference that you're going to be using. So you change CPU for the appropriate value that you need to do that. I'm not going to use it, so let's just comment it out. And then we have a volume here that is for the model that is going to be using for machine learning. It's not going to be mounted to anything in the NAS. It's just going to create it and use it. And then we specify the environment variables here, which is the usual, the time zone, the user, and the group ID. But this specific server, the machine learning, listens on port 3003, so I'm exposing it there too. And I'm going to say that I restart it unless I manually stop it. So that's the second container. Now we need the Redis cache server, so that's a cache for the database. We're going to name this service Redis, and the container is going to be Immich-Redis with capital letters on the beginning. And this is the specific image and the specific hash that we're going to be using for this. And I'm going to get the variables again like before, time zone, user, and group ID, and also restart only if I have not manually stopped it. Now the last thing that we need to do is a database server. So for that, we're going to name the service database, and the container is going to be named image-postgres. And we're going to use the specific hash of this specific image in Docker Hub. Again, we're going to specify the typical environment variables, which is the time zone, the user, and the group, but we also have to specify the password for the Postgres database, the user for the Postgres database. In this case, I'm using Postgres for both. You can change that to whatever you want. And then the name of the database is going to be Immich, because that's the name of the application that we're setting up. And then we want the Postgres init database arguments to be do a data checksum whenever it loads the container. So it makes sure that everything is good, no data was corrupted and stuff like that. And we're mounting now the database folder in the NAS to the appropriate location in the container, which is var lib PostgreSQL data. So when it creates all the database, it's going to store it in the folder where we have our database stored. And then there's a command here that is going to execute when it runs. And basically it's, telling Postgres to do some things, to enable compression and put some limits for buffers and stuff like that. And basically configure it. And then again, we restart the container unless we manually stop it. And in here, we're defining that volume that needs to be created that we specified here for the machine learning server. So that's it. Basically all that we need to create here in the Docker Compose file. And now let's see quickly in here that we don't have anything in the config. And in my case, we're not going to see anything because I'm not using the config. So it's not going to store anything here. And then the database is currently empty. There's no database files. And in here in the uploads, we don't have anything. So we'll see how this gets populated when we run this. So now let's go ahead and say save. And let's build this. And now it's going to create the container. I already pulled Immich, so it's not going to pull it. It's going to be pretty fast, and it's going to create everything. So I'll be back when this is done, and then we'll see the progress on this. Alright, we have received the exit code 0, which means that it was built, and we should be getting the, here we go, notification saying that it was built successfully. Let's clear that out, and it's going to go back into the containers and see what's going on. In the way that I set this up is pretty fast. Their original documentation is absurdly slow, so you'll see that it's pretty good this way. Now, let's go into the Postgres database. Let's go into the logs and see what's going on. Here, basically it was pretty fast. It says that it set it up and created a database and then restarted the server basically, and the Postgres service is ready, and that's basically it. No more logs here because it was successful at doing what it needed to do. We can validate that by going into here, going to the database folder, and when we are in, we should see that now we have a bunch of folders, and that's all the stuff that contains all our database for the database container. So that's good. We can go back here. Now we go back into the containers, and now we can go into the Redis, which is the cache. Let's go to the logs, and it says, Redis is starting, blah 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 blah, server initialized, ready to accept connection. So that means that it was able to connect to the database, and it's ready to work as a cache for our database. So we're good here. Everything looking right. No more updates, so fine. Now, if we go into the server, in the Immich server, and we go into the logs, then we see here, and this is something very important that I want you to know about running this application. My virtual NAS is a virtual machine that has 4 cores assigned to it. And it says it's starting Immich, it's starting the API worker, the microservices worker. Let's refresh this a little bit. And now it's starting to initialize the WebSockets and all that stuff. So we should see more stuff here. While that is working, notice here how it is consuming basically half of my CPU sometimes. And that's because I don't have hardware acceleration. I don't have a graphics card for the machine learning server and for the actual Immich server. So it's cranking that CPU, and sometimes you'll see that this might even go to like 100 almost. So be aware of that. If you're running this, there is an environment variable that you can assign that is to only assign a certain amount of cores to the server. So you might benefit from setting that variable there, because if not, it's just gonna, grab everything that you have in your course like it did here. Now let's refresh here. It's still working, so let's be patient, because we should get a message here that says that it's listening on a specific port. So we have to let it do its thing. We're on a warning state right now, and the machine learning server seems to be green, so let's check on that real quick. Alright, so this one seems alright. It says that it started the G Unicorn, it's listening, and it's using a worker, booting the worker, started the server process and all that, and the application startup was completed. So that's good. We're just waiting for the actual Immich server to get up and running properly. So let's keep monitoring that log, and whenever we see the good notification that everything is working properly, then we'll be able to go into the website and see the user interface. Alright, I've waited about like 8 or 9 minutes, and now I see when I refresh that there's a lot of stuff going on. This is what we're looking for. We want to see that it is working, so we see doing an initial mount file for the backups folder and all that, successfully verified system. So when you see that it's creating folders, we can go back here and then go into the uploads directory. And then you see that it's creating all those folders there. So you have the upload, the thumbs, the profile, the library, encoded video, and backups. So that's what it was doing. It was creating all of that. So now we have here all that we need. The database from the database container, the uploads from the server. And since I didn't use the config, I don't have anything here. But if you did that, then you would see the config file here. And whenever you make an update to that, it'll probably update it here. So let's continue monitoring this, because it's doing a lot of things. It's going to take some time. Now it's working on geodata, records, and stuff like that. So let's refresh until we can see Immich microservices is running. Okay, almost there. We're completely almost there. So refresh. We should be seeing sometime soon a message that says that it is listening. So we're waiting for that. Alright, I went into the URL, and it turns out that even though I don't see the message here that says listening yet, it did load the application. So if you go into the IP of your NAS on port 2283, because remember that's the one that we specified for the server, 2283, then you get this user interface, which is the user interface where you configure if you don't use a configuration file. So in here we basically have to say getting started. We have to create an administrator, so I'm going to use me at me.me, and I'm going to use Immich as the password for this lab. Immich, okay, and then I'm going to put my name here as the user, and then I can say sign up, and then it creates my user. So now I should be able to come here and put me at me.me, and then Immich as the password, and then log it into the application. This part here might be a little slow because it's the initial setup, but it gives you a nice little purple bar on top that lets you know, how far you're into that. So just be patient. If you click the buttons and you kind of see that it is slow, it's normal, it happens. And remember, I said here, look at the monitor. So you see that it usually gives me a spike that takes me like 40-50% of the processor, And I haven't even done anything. There's no images to process or videos or anything like that. So once you're processing stuff, don't be surprised if you don't have hardware transcoding that it might just, take all your CPU. So don't worry about that. Okay, so now I'm in. It says welcome. Now we have to set up the instance. I'm going to click on theme. I like the dark, so I'm going to pick that and say privacy. And then in here you have some options to, some features. So if you want to enable the map and the version check, by default it's turned on. I'm going to leave it like that, so I'm going to go next. And then for the storage template, they say that this is by default off because there's some stability issues that they're having. Remember, this application is still in its infancy. It still has some issues. Their repository basically says it. It says be patient. There's some bugs and stuff, so that's part of it. So I'm gonna leave it off. I'm gonna say done, and here we go. We're in the application now, and it can detect all the storage that I have in my NAS currently in my lab. Gives me the version. It says that the server is online. We have all the options here to navigate, etc. So we just now have to upload some photos. So let me try to put a couple of photos here to see what it does. You can upload directly here on this button, and then it'll give you a pop-up window to look for stuff. So let's do that. So I am gonna upload a picture of myself here. So once you do that, then it starts uploading and it shows you stuff here. Let me see if I can find something else to upload there to have some kind of content here. Alright, so I'm uploading about 4 more photos here and see what it does. Let's be patient with this. If we look into the folders, we should see that whenever we upload something, it should go into the uploads directory here. And then probably into the upload here is where it would most likely dump all the stuff. So yeah, you see it creates folders and just keeps adding, like organizing everything. So that's why these folders exist. You see, there's an image there. So that's how it's working. Now let's give it time and see if we can notice anything happening here. And here we go. It took a little bit of time, but finally loaded. And here's the photos that I uploaded. As you can see, we got a little bubble tea here from ET Phone Home. I found that to be very, very funny and nice. So yeah, that's one of the photos that I uploaded. And here's when we got the snowstorm, like about 3 weeks ago. And when I had to go through the effort of cleaning, shoveling all that snow so that my car could get out of the house. So that's there. And here's a cabin in West Virginia that I went to. So that's another photo. And then here is a photo of myself after getting a haircut. So that looks okay. And in here, this is a place that I interviewed for a job a few months ago. So yeah, let's see what kind of metadata it pulls from that. So now if we go into explore, let's see what we get here. Nothing. But we go into the map, then we see that it is able to use the metadata to identify where the pictures were taken. And it is very accurate. So if you can see here, this is where I went to interview for the job. And here's where I took the other photos at home, basically. So there other photos don't have metadata, so that's why you don't see them here. But yeah, it's pretty accurate. If the photos do have metadata, it is able to read it and then gives you the map with that information. And then if we go into sharing, this is the option if you want to create an album and share it with people and stuff. Here you can mark favorites, here you can see your albums and all that. So I'm not going to cover all of this. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You can go into their website and see all the documentation and everything. And but the point is that it is working now in a Synology NAS. So I highly appreciate Nedgar's patience in me getting this video out for him. He donated to the channel, so I didn't want to let him down. I want to make sure that he has this video. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this one. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Also, leave me comments in the comment section below, because I make all of these videos because of things that you let me know that you are interested in, applications that you're curious about, that you think might be useful, etc. And also, I prioritize people that donate to the channel to try to make the videos for them. So if you want to support me, feel free to donate with the link in the description below in PayPal, or you also have a Bitcoin wallet if you prefer to do it that way. And as you know, I'm not monetizing this channel. You should have not received an ad from YouTube on this video, but that also means that I'm not making money from this, and I don't have all other options that are available for people, like joining the community and doing super thanks and stuff like that. So I entirely rely on your support through PayPal or Bitcoin. So I really appreciate it if you find the content useful and you want to support me, so that then I can focus more on the channel. So I'll see you in the next one. Take care.